Had a big head, rounded ears, 6 feet in the body maybe, with a very, very long tail, very muscular build. As it was walking, it was still looking at me, and that's when I really panicked.
It looked at me and thought, oh, there's a human there, I'm not scared. You say, well, I've seen this big cat, and some people just flatly refuse. They think that Britain's such a sweet little island, we shouldn't have predators that size.
I heard this growl behind me, nothing like a dog's growl, and just like anything else in life, you're sat on your own there. I don't care who you are, how brave you are, something like that will put the shivers up your spine.
As she was walking, before the cub came out, she flicked this tail. She literally flicked it in the air. And I simply could not believe what I was seeing. It was the most extraordinary feeling.
It threw its head back, he said, and it made this sort of round.
But when you actually realise that there are big cats living in Britain, it changes everything.
Welcome to Big Cat Conversations. We speak directly to people who've encountered one of Britain's big cats. We also discuss the bigger picture. Why are unofficial big cats being seen, and could these cats even be naturalising without us knowing? If you've had a big cat encounter in Britain and would like to discuss it, email me at rick@bigcatconversations.com. You can find other episodes on the website bigcatconversations.com. I'm Rick Minter, and thanks for joining me. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 7 of Big Cat Conversations. Before we introduce our two different guests from Leicestershire and Rutland, I want to make a couple of announcements. The first one is just a big thank you to everyone who's listening. It's really nice to know we've got a viable audience, we think, for the start of these podcasts. And in particular, we want to say a big shout out to listeners from Australia. It's really great to know some of you are listening from Australia, where we know there are parallel issues. In fact, we're going to discuss that in an in-depth interview with Simon Townsend from Victoria in episode 10, it should be. So look out for that one. And on a link in the website under this episode on Big Cat Conversations, you can see the trailer for a new film being made in Australia called The Hunt. So you can see a 3-minute clip of that on our website. Today we're in Leicestershire and Rutland, really in Middle England and neighbouring counties as well. We're going to hear from Nigel Spencer, who's been active on the scene for many years, and compared to him, I really am a Johnny-come-lately. Nigel, welcome to the show. Thanks very much for coming on. And one of the last times I saw you, your dad was finishing his career of interest in big cats, and I gather he died in 2012. But he was the chap who got you all started, didn't he? I gather he had a sighting around 95. Could we start with hearing about that sighting he had and what it led to?
Sure. Thanks for inviting me on. Yeah, we had a bit of a small holding over on the border of Rutland in High Leicestershire, which is, as the name suggests, the hilly part of Leicestershire, the ideal big cat country. And Dad was a lecturer at the time at the university in textiles, so nothing to do with big cats. But we had this little small holding, and my grandparents came over and said that they'd seen this strange animal in the field. So we went off to look for the livestock to see if there was any livestock in the field, and there wasn't. And we were laughing about it, saying, it's probably a calf. But it turned out, obviously, there were no livestock in the field. And then a couple of months later, they saw it again. And I jokingly said, well, I wonder if it's this big cat that's being seen. Because at that point, the Rutland Panther, or Beast of Rutland, was being seen. And we wondered whether it might be that. Dad poo-pooed the whole thing and said, this is absolute rubbish. There's no way there's anything like this running around the countryside. But they were adamant this animal they saw was actually a cat. It wasn't one of the livestock. There weren't any livestock in the field. It was winter. And they were adamant it was. So Dad had a chat with the local police. cats, and he came over, the wildlife officer, took it quite seriously, and they came over and they went off and searched one of the barns, and I stood on the hillside above watching with the video in case anything came out. They did find some evidence of a big predator had been up on the bales and eating rabbits and various bones and that up there, but there was no animal actually at that point. And in January 1995, so a couple of months after this, Dad was walking out of the house to take the dog out about 7 o'clock in the morning, and this animal came charging down the field. It was a very frosty morning, and he thought to start with it was a horse coming down from the field opposite, and the gate was wide open, so he was concerned this animal was going to come out onto the road. So he was just about to walk over to shut the gate, and this big cat came charging through the gateway at him, not even aware he was there. Its head was down, and it was just lolloping along, and he stood his ground because it was going to basically collide with him, and shouted, lifted his arms, and the animal just swerved in front of him and went off down the road.
Wow.
He said he'd smelt it, seen it, heard it, and he got no evidence it existed, and that was it. It lolloped off into the gloom. The lights obviously had got it in the house, and then it went off down the road, and you got a very, very strong smell of ammonia from it. And the dog he had was quite a big dog. She just stood there. He said she almost looked like she'd encountered it before when he'd been on walks, that she'd stop and put her nose in the air. And so she just basically just stood there. She didn't do anything. She didn't growl, didn't snarl. And this animal had gone.
At what stage in that encounter did he realise what it truly was?
Well, I think the fact that he had this huge tail that sort of went down on S shape and then came across, almost brushed his face as it went off down the road, and the strong smell of ammonia, which I will come on to later, but when we subsequently got involved with Drayton Manor, obviously it's one of the first things you notice when you're involved with the leopards there, that you can smell that really strong. And obviously the way the animal looked, Dad was brought up in the countryside and spent all his life living in the countryside. When we moved to Nossington in 1970, he got involved with the local farmers as well, despite being a lecturer at the university, nothing to do with farming. He got heavily involved, so he was really into countryside ways. So there wasn't very much that he didn't know about.
And then he started being a recorder of reports and mapping them and visiting people, is that right?
Yeah, well, it was a bit of a strange one because, like it or not, there seems to be this sense of, well, an airline pilot saw it. It's a UFOs type syndrome. An airline pilot saw it, whereas Joe Bloggs, the binman, saw a UFO and everybody just laughed. So it's that sort of scenario. Radio 4 came over and did an interview about it because they'd picked up on all these sightings, and it became a lot more credible. And obviously the police were involved as well again. And Neil Hughes, who was the wildlife inspector for Leicestershire and Rutland Police, decided to come over and have a chat with us and said, we're getting loads of these sightings. Would you fancy investigating them? Because Dad was obviously showing an interest, because after poo-pooing the whole thing and saying it was absolutely impossible, he'd suddenly become witness to it to himself and was determined then to try and prove that they did exist. So it sort of snowballed from there, and we were getting people ringing up with reports. And as I say, we started to work with the police and get their reports and start to go and investigate them and feed back in. Obviously, if there was any danger or any threat to the public, then the police had to make that call.
You saw a different coloured one a few years later yourself.
I encountered a puma, and again, going back to the early days, we started getting heavily involved, and one of the earliest sightings we had was this sheep was actually quite a large lamb in November, so you can imagine by November they're quite big, 25 odd kilo, was actually decapitated at the side of a fence, and we actually had blood along the second rail of the fence, so you can see the animal's been attacked sideways, pinned against the fence. The carcass was actually carried across 5-foot fence and a hawthorn hedge onto the other side and eaten in the field where the livestock weren't. So the sheep were all on one side, this animal was eaten on the other side. And that was an incredible investigation, because we found on the fleece the classic marks of a big cat where it had actually gone into the side. It had fractured ribs on the animal when it had swiped it with its paw, and we could see the wool had actually looped through the skin on the inside. So the claws had penetrated from the outside, come in, and they pushed the wool through, and you could see the claw. And you were talking a spread of about a man's hands, fingers.
Wow, yeah.
That was the spread of the claws. So again, you got pretty conclusive evidence that some very large predator had been involved in that. It wasn't a fox or anything like that, or a badger. And we took that over to Drayton Manor Zoo, and John Foden straight away said, that's a leopard that's done that. That was really started to push our interest, and I got heavily involved with Essex big cats. I was spending a lot of time time working away all around the country. As you know, I travelled down to your patch quite a lot. I was spending a lot of time in Essex. I was dealing with John Hancock lot, who was picking up all the sightings right down to Clacton, even all that area, and investigating. So they were getting sightings coming in all the time as well, very similar. I was driving back in April 2000, April the 1st, 2000, and as I was coming out from Braintree to a little village called Sybil Headingham, which is in North Essex, 9 o'clock at night, I sort of came into the 30 mile an hour to go into the village, and as I came round the corner, there was a mountain lion puma in the middle of the road, just walking across the road, and I stopped with the animal virtually in front of the bonnet, and it was above the bonnet line on the Mondeo, and it just plodded into the hedge. Very narrow verge at that point, so it literally just went off the road, but it was taking up my side of the road, so I had a white line. I could see the scale of it because of its height on the bonnet. I did have a video with me, but by the time I'd stopped to even start thinking about turning it, in those days, JVC, VHC videos took a little while to turn on. It was gone. The sad thing is, obviously, if that had happened today with a dash cam, it would have been absolutely fantastic, irrefutable evidence. I mean, I've had a few encounters with wildlife on the road. You get some very, very good pictures from these dash cams now, and there would have been no question because we had everything there. You know, you got the scale of the road, you got the height of the bonnet. It was pretty obvious what the animal was. And it literally was just walking across my side of the road. It just slinked into the hedge. It wasn't even running. It was just plodding across. And it was right by a forest track on the right-hand side. Subsequently, I found that there have been scores of sightings at that location. Not just puma, but black leopard as well, crossing at exactly that point. So obviously the animals do use that track and come through the woods and then come out.
But that 1st of April, that wasn't a good date to see a big cat.
No, I know, but yeah, 1st of April. But it's one of those dates that sits in your mind because the first thing I did, of course, was ring John, who lived down in Braintree. And he said, I'll come out. And I said, well, it's gone. And literally on the left-hand side of me, within, a quarter of a mile, you go into the massive ex-military base of Wethersfield, sorry. It was being used as Metropolitan Police, paramilitary type training, SAS type commandos, that sort of thing. And they were getting a lot of sightings all along there as well. But
these days, of course, we would see if we could get permission to put a trail camera on either side of the road at a crossing point.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, having seen how many reports there's been, I would have thought a camera just at that location on the trail would have probably been quite good because these animals are a creature of habit from what we've discovered. You often find that they do use these trails, forest trails, these, disused railways. And
linear
whatever.
routes, yeah.
And they seem to be creatures of habit. So the amount of times that I can look at a location where it's crossed the road and crikey, it did that last year and the year before, or a couple of months ago at that point. But just going back to this one as well, the interesting thing was when I rang John, he said he'd taken a report from a police officer at Saffron Walden about 3 days before. And the animal I saw was a very, very golden yellow, really, really golden. It got the puma white underneath its chin and everything, but it was a really goldeny yellow, biscuity yellow, yellow colour.
Yeah, they do vary, don't they?
Yeah, some of them can be quite a dark colour, almost like
gingery.
A really dark fox colour, yeah. And then he rang me up the next night to say it had been seen again about a mile from where I saw it in Earls Colne, one of the next villages, and it had walked through the farmyard at 12:30 in the daytime, broad daylight, straight through the farmyard, and the farmer's wife saw it from the farmhouse, and she described it the same. So very, very bright, goldeny colour.
Yeah. What scale was it as you saw it? What sort of size compared to a dog?
Size, if you imagine a B road, its body was taking up most of that side of the B road to the centre line. So you're talking a good 3 or 4 foot of body and then a couple of feet tail on top of that.
Looking at over the years that you and your dad were taking reports and still do, what proportions, if we assume that the majority of the cats reported fit black panther, leopard, puma, mountain lion and lynx, what are the proportions you've had in those years?
I'd probably say 60% probably black leopard. And I say black leopard because a lot of the reports we've had other factors. So it wasn't just a black cat that looked like a black leopard. We've had all the other bits. So we've had it in light and people close enough to be able to see the rosettes underneath.
That's unusual, yeah.
The coat, so you've actually had that. So we've had that. We have had puma, definitely, mountain lions. So there's probably maybe 30%. And then lynx, very, very rare. We have had a couple of lynx, but most of the time it's been either a black leopard or a puma. I mean, a funny story, we have another area here was a hotspot, was the Castle Cement Works at Ketton. It became so common there that they even make a joke of it when they have an open day. They have little black cutouts of the cats and they position them all around the quarry for the kids to try and find. But they were getting sightings all the time, and the quarry managers, everybody there seen it. We actually took Heart of the Country there to film, and of course they had a field day because they were sat there at the time. They used to have Caterpillar heavy machinery for the quarry. They've moved off to a different make now, but they had cats. Here we are with big cats, and we've actually got big cats.
Yes, great.
It was a bit of an eye-opener, I think, because Tony Francis, I think it was with us, is the producer at the time. And I think he was a little bit sceptical. And then, of course, once he met the quarry manager, who was a very level-headed chap, was just coming out of retirement, and he was just so matter-of-fact about it that it was like, wow. And then when we were driving round and the security guard stopped us and said, what are you doing? And Barry Bedford said, oh, we're doing a documentary about the panther that wanders around here. And the guard just looked at him and said, oh, so you know about it?
Great.
And apparently the night before he'd been sat in his vehicle petrified because it had come out the gateway and he didn't dare get out his vehicle for an hour to go and open the gate so he could carry on.
Yeah.
And he never told anybody because he just thought nobody would believe him. And Barry just said, oh, of course everybody knows about it. He said, everybody's seen it.
Is that the location where you turned up and one of the guys said, oh, and the lads feed a lynx, but you won't be interested in that, will you?
Yeah, so at the back of the workshops, they had the bins and that. Barry said, oh, we get the lynx comes down here because you're not looking for that, are you? You want the panther.
Yes.
And Tony's like, what? And he went, oh, yeah. He said, well, it's all a triple SI wood in there. It's massive. You can hide an army. It's all quarried limestone from sort of the 1800s through to the early 1900s, and it's just abandoned and grown over, and you can imagine what it's like. So absolutely ideal habitat for any animal like a lynx or a black leopard. And it's interesting because, again, we've got two species that are obviously interacting in some way because they know that they obviously are aware of each other. And we found this before, we found it with the pumas. The black leopard would get seen, and then we'd have a puma sighting within half a mile the same day.
Yes, that happens everywhere. It happens in Gloucestershire. It's like they know the best places and descend on them and sort out territories in those places. And
they must be aware of it.
Yeah.
One of the things that we did have in the early days, not so much with Leicestershire, because Leicestershire were pretty good. And I think the reason Leicestershire and Rutland were good was because of Neil, who's retired now. But Neil Hughes was a very level-headed wildlife inspector. In fact, he went on when he retired to become one of the only special wildlife officers in the country. So he carried on in his run.
We're talking police forces now, yeah.
And so whenever there was any sort of incident, they were always very level-headed. I noticed in other areas they panic. So as soon as a big cat was seen, you'd have armed response out, they'd have helicopters up. In fact, I can remember an incident at Shrewsbury on the A5 in Shropshire, and somebody had seen it from one of the travel lodges wandering down the side of the A5, and they just locked the whole area down, shut the A5. And I can remember having a chat with Neil about it, and I said, have you seen what's happened? And he just sort of looked at me.
Yeah, as if all that commotion will achieve anything.
Can't really criticise, but if we did that every time there was a big cat sighting, nobody'd be moving.
Yeah, that would give you no chance of finding it or finding any information.
No, because these animals are so elusive. They really are, and they can just literally go into a hedge and they're gone. With drones, a lot of the forces are getting thermal imaging drones. You have got a chance. And I think if you're genuinely trying to get one of these on film, you need a decent budget. But I think if you've got a company that have got enough of a budget, if you've got a load of fast response vehicles with drones and the authority to use them, and possibly hotlines and that, so people do phone in and you get an instant update, then you might stand a chance of getting something up and starting to get some footage. But the frustrating thing is, in America, we know what happens because they put a radio tag on the puma and suddenly they realise they've got a huge issue with pumas wandering in and out of towns that nobody ever realised were even there, because it totally opens up a new world when you put a radio tag on, because they're suddenly realising what they've got.
Yes, yeah.
Well, they're going across 5-6 lane interstates into Santa Barbara, Santa Monica, all around in California, going into people's gardens at night.
Supermarket car parks at night.
Car park. Yeah. And that is exactly what we find over here. The amount of sightings we've had at McDonald's.
Yeah.
It's an easy lunch. People are chucking food out. There's lots of rats and rabbits and stuff like that floating around all around the Barney's. So the amount of McDonald's restaurants where we've had sightings around the car parks.
Yeah, the smell, just the meat smell at the back of the premises. Yeah, we've had the same conversation in the previous episode in the Chilterns and Buckinghamshire of the urban fringe leopards and pumas. They are generalists, they're very resourceful, and they will take an easy life if they can get it, as well as being adept at hunting and scouting out for deer.
Over the years, some of the reports that we've had have just been mind-blowing, to the point where we've had very senior people in local authority in that, where they've actually been trapped in a vehicle with a big cat walking around the car's locked, and they're on 3 nines trying to get help.
Well, we've had magistrates report them in Gloucestershire, and you've had high-ranking people in Leicestershire, haven't you, report them?
Lots of serving police officers, but also, of course, zookeepers. Going back to Robin and John Foden, I can remember in the early days when we were involved with them, they had black leopard in captivity. They were one day sitting in the office and some lady rang them up and said, one of your cats has escaped. Robin said, no, don't think so. And she said, yes, it is. It's in my garden, which is about 2 miles away at Stony Middleton, and Drayton Manor's over in Tamworth there. So it was just up the road. So she was very insistent. He asked her to describe it. She did describe a black leopard. So anyway, they said, well, we'll come over. He said, I can assure you it's not ours, because both of ours are sat in the cage quite happily, but we'll come over and have a look. And they got over there expecting a domestic cat or something there, and the lady says, look, it's there. And John just looked, and there was this black leopard. It looked up at him, got up and just walked off into the back and into the wood. And John ran after it, and he got halfway into the wood, and he said he suddenly realised nobody had followed him, and he hadn't got a clue what sort of history this animal had got, because obviously it was wild, and got the better of it, and he decided to come back out of the wood quite quick while Robin was laughing his head off.
Yeah.
But he said, if anybody had said to me there was a black leopard 2 miles up the road from the zoo, he said, no. Robin saw a puma on the A42, and he said, coming up to just off the end of the M42 where it becomes the A42 Ashby Parva, and he said it was sat on the side of the A42 dual carriageway, sunning itself, and all the traffic was slowing down to have a look. And he said, I just couldn't believe it. He said there was a mountain lion just sitting there in the sun.
Yeah, and these days, of course, passengers would have mobile phones cameras, so you'd have a chance.
Yeah, I mean, this was back in the late 90s, and hopefully people will start to come up with decent photos. But we keep saying that. The trouble is, it does happen quick.
Yes.
And so that's where a dash cam is good, because it's recording all the time, and home securities and things like that. So, you might find somebody that's had an incident at night, the lights have gone on, and they've gone through the footage and found and got it.
Yeah, I mean, some of these things we're talking about do exist, but people don't release them, of course. And I've seen some, and I've had people insist they've got it, but don't share it.
Yeah. There was a case in the early 90s, and it was British Rail. They got a really good CCTV of this black leopard in the car park at Ipswich Station, and for reasons better known to ourselves, the police took the footage and destroyed it. And it's all been admitted to.
Yeah.
John went down and investigated, and the Eastern Daily News, whatever, they got involved trying to find the details. And of course, this happened with the Link in Norfolk. That got stuck in a freezer and forgotten all about, and then all of a sudden it popped up under the Freedom of Information, and the story broke.
Yes.
But it took it from the 90s. It didn't break until well into, I can't remember, was it 2006 or something like that?
2006, yeah. The gamekeeper who...
The police knew about it, but it was all kept very quiet and hush-hush.
Yeah. And incidentally, Ipswich Centre still gets reports of big black panthers now. It's the river corridor, I think, which takes animals nearby, and they would sometimes disperse, close to the town centre. And of course, the more you learn about these animals, the less it surprises you. But to people who know nothing about them, it is a surprise.
I mean, I knew nothing about it when I first started with my dad, and everything that we've discovered as we've gone along was a journey that it all added up. We had an incident with the pond of one of I shan't name him, but he was a famous rugby player and England captain as well. And his pond got attacked while he was on holiday, and the neighbour actually saw this big cat. And he went round, and the lining on the pond was shredded. It was almost like you could see the width of the claws where it had damaged it. But we couldn't understand what he was doing. And then the neighbour said, well, I'm sure it was full of frog spawn, and the frog spawn's all gone. So we rang Drayton Manor and had a chat with them about it. And straight away, they'll take frog spawn because it's very, very high protein.
Yes, yeah. So it's not koi carp fishing.
No, I mean, there has been koi carp gone. I mean, the trouble with koi carp is that it's always difficult to know whether it's an otter.
Yes, oh yeah, but it's been seen. They've been seen doing it in Gloucestershire.
What, koi carp?
Yeah, koi carp fishing. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, we had one, and the owner was absolutely adamant it was not possible to be, and I agreed with him because it was a big carp, and it had been carried across a river that in flood and eaten on the field on the other side.
but an otter can do that. You're right.
It wasn't an area where otters were known to be, but there was definitely a big cat around there because it was being seen.
You had a key National Farmers Union rep reporter, Mother and Cub, didn't you?
He's on the edge of about 5-6 miles from where my dad lived in the other part of High Leicestershire, and he was combining, just shutting down the combine late at night waiting for his lift, and he heard a noise, swung the torch round, and the mother was jumping across the rows of corn from the combine, and there was a cub going underneath the straw, following her, going across. It was quite incredible, really. And subsequently, since then, there's been a few others sightings of it around that area, and another one a bit closer to us. The farmers used to live in South Africa and were very used to black leopards. They had it in their field twice on the same day each year when they were combining, exactly the same day. And the wife was out horse riding, and she's absolutely adamant that in this thicket, when they were riding by, it spooked the horses that it was a leopard. She said you could hear the leopard cough, and she said unmistakable sound of a leopard.
And the horses reacted.
Oh yeah, the horses were spooked quite often, and we've had reports off horse riders, and the horses have seen it first or smelt it and got quite spooked by it, and the riders have then looked to try and see what's upsetting the horse, and then they can see it. But the horses can see it long before the riders do. And I've been into areas where there's definitely been an animal there somewhere, and I've not been able to see it, but the horses are absolutely going mad, charging up and down and stamping their feet, looking at a certain position. And it's a really difficult job when you're looking at a thicket, unless you've got thermal imaging trying to work out what's in there.
Yes, and it's very difficult. I mean, I have to visit stables sometimes and horse owners. It's very difficult to give those people advice because, they're aware that their horses are being totally freaked out. What do you do other than use flashing lights at night to scare off a local cat that won't budge or keeps coming and scaring the horses?
Yeah, well, I mean, we had an attack on a horse in the Vale of Beaver, and it was a real nasty attack and wound, and we think that was a puma. Talking to Robin, they're more inclined to think that it was a puma jumping onto it, but something had jumped onto this, and it was a stallion as well. And the owners were saying, there's just nothing that could get in there because it's so protective, powerful. But this animal was about, I think it was 19 hand hunter, and something had got in and it had slashed the back of it right the way down from just above its tail down. It almost looked like a knife, but the wounds got infected straight away really badly, and the vet said he'd never seen anything like it. And if you looked at it, it was again the spread of a man's fingers. So if you got all your fingers apart, it was that sort of spread of claw marks.
Yeah, we've had some vet verified ones in and around Gloucestershire. It's nasty. And it's often assumed to be a young tom puma still learning the ropes and going for the wrong target, and probably learning that you get a bumpy ride and it's not worth doing, and go for the deer next time.
There was a sighting of puma kits, and that was a police inspector was out on a day out with his family at Conkers, which is the part of the National Forest, the sort of park area and landscapes, and there's a huge lake there called Albert Lake, and they were walking along the footpath along the side of the lake, and all of a sudden in front of them, in the side of the bushes and on the track in the dust, were these puma kits, and they were sitting there playing in the sun, and they looked at him, and he said their eyes were just huge. He said it was just incredible. He said they knew they were babies, he said, but these things were massive. Anyway, I showed him some pictures of puma kits, which obviously at that age are stripy.
Or spotty,
sorry. And so he was obviously quite perturbed and asked where the mother was, and said, the mother's in the bush at the side there somewhere, or would have been watching you.
Yeah.
And sort of, what's happening about this, And I said, well, nothing. These are quite common now. They're being seen all the time. And I think he went away and had a chat with Neil, and then realised that all his colleagues were seeing them as well. He said, I never even knew about this. Couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
It was like, yeah.
Yeah, and you're damned if you do and damned if you don't sort of react, aren't you? That's the problem for authorities.
The trouble is, I think they realised that quite early on because, as I say, we did spend a lot of time with them, and at the end of the day, it's a massive operation. And just to catch one animal, even if it's in an open area like Dartmoor or Exmoor, but when you've got the population like we have wandering around, they can just disappear through a hedge and they're gone. And there's no way of using any firearms or anything in those sort of areas. It's impossible.
And you'd probably do more harm than good in the commotion that would follow.
To be fair, we've always been told an injured animal is going to be far more dangerous and deadly than one that's hunting at the moment. Although I think in this country, we're very lucky because there's adequate food stock. There's lots of roadkill, which you don't tend to get so much in some of the countries that they're in. So there's a lot of roadkill, and they do take roadkill. There's been lots of sightings picking up carrion off the road. And again, it's something that's well documented. They'll do that. They do seem to get on okay. I still can't answer where they go to. I mean, we do know that, like most wildlife, they disappear. You don't very often see a dead fox in a field unless you've been shot.
Yeah. But cats skulk away when they die. They don't keel over in the middle of a field. Their body would rot away and nature clears that very quickly. I ought to just get you to tell your missing body story, Nigel. That remains a classic. The conspiracy theory of the lorry driver. Can we hear that one?
Yeah, we had driver phoned us up. He actually knew my dad, and he'd gone up the A1 northbound and saw this big cat, or he thought it was a big cat, and he thought, I'll check it out. And he came back. As he came back, he drove slowly, and it was there, still there. And he phoned us up when he got back to the yard, and we were over there within about an hour and a half. And we searched about half a mile of the A1, never even found a badger. There was nothing there. And Neil even tried to get hold of he got hold of Highways to find out if anybody from Highways had picked it up, but nobody came forward. But then we had a situation with a retired police officer who was actually adamant there was one in the roadworks where a lorry had knocked the back end of it off, but it was lying in the roadwork near Colville in West Leicestershire. He was a retired police officer, and he said it's absolutely certain this was a big cat. We couldn't get any information off Highways. They wouldn't even tell us got no record of even a dog being picked up off the road there.
Yeah.
It's very bizarre. Very, very odd.
I had a similar one. A retired senior police officer was in a traffic queue on the Oxford bypass, and he said there was a dead mountain lion in the central reservation, and he'd driven past it very slowly, and he thought many, many people must have seen it. This was, again, before mobile phone cameras, and he just felt it would be useful for big cat groups to know about in case they wanted to follow up, and this was the day after the event. I know Steve Archibald from Oxfordshire spent sort of the next afternoon wandering through along the central reservation, which takes some doing, but found naught, of course. But the one that the lorry driver saw that you followed up, you assumed that was a full-on adult black leopard, did you, from his description?
He said he was fairly certain when he went by that it was, but when he came back, he slowed right down to have a look, and he said, yeah, definitely. Said it wasn't a dog, it was a cat, but there was nothing. We searched the whole area where it was, and I'm confirmed with him where it was, the location, so we knew we had the right location.
Well, we're going over time, Nigel. It's terrific to hear all of these perspectives and reports. What do you think about big cat living in the British countryside? What's your personal view?
Well, my view is that they've been here for an awful long time, and we've had reports in our area going back to the 80s. And as you know, there's been reports from the 60s and that with the Surrey puma. So they've been with us for a long time now. They don't seem to be causing problems. Most farmers that I know are quite happy because they go through flocks, sometimes don't even touch the flock, just walk through. And we need something to keep the deer down because the deer population is just exploding at the moment. So anything that can control deer and rabbits and that, it's probably a good thing. So there's a lot more dangerous things out there than that. More people get trampled by livestock and killed in the UK each year than ever get killed by big cats in the whole world. People forget that, and that's quite legal, livestock on footpaths.
Yeah, and unfortunately, sometimes it's people who work on farms themselves get into trouble with their own livestock, yeah.
So you've got to get it into perspective. If you look how many mountain lion fatalities have been in America and then compare that to that sort of thing, then it's minute, really. Yeah. I think it scares people because they don't tend to back away like people expect they would. But they're not putting themselves in danger. They just got a bit more tolerance than, say, a deer or something that's going to be disappearing miles away.
Yeah, sure.
The thing to remember is 99% of the time, you will only see a big cat if it's comfortable with you seeing it. If it's not, then you won't see it.
Sure.
It's very rare you'll see one catch one out. They'll always be aware that you're there.
Splendid. Thank you so much for coming on, Nigel. It's been lovely to hear the history of the county's reports, and we'll keep in touch. And for now, many thanks for coming on Big Cat Conversations.
Thank you very much, Rick.
This episode's words of the week are the recorder effect. Now, the recorder effect is a factor which relates to all aspects of biological recording and mapping and considering the distribution of a species of plant or animal or reptile under consideration. And that is the issue of, is the recording and mapping and data collection relating to the actual physical presence of the creature under review, or is it more to do with the fact that recorders are more active in certain geographical areas than others? So are you recording the nature of the beast itself or the actual activity of the person recording? That particularly relates to big cats in Britain. Clearly there are not going to be many big cats in Britain. We have to be careful also in the actual recording of the reports. Some may be more credible, some less credible, but we also have to consider, are certain areas seeming to be a black hole with no reports when there may be some big cats there, but there's nobody trusted or known or active to take reports to actually record for the cats to be known about. That relates to last episode's edition from Buckinghamshire and the Chilterns, because Paolo is pretty well known in that area. He has a good network. So is Buckinghamshire more active on big cats than neighbouring counties? Maybe not. It's simply a fact that Paolo is known and is getting records there. So there's our words of the week, the recorder effect. Well, our next guest on the show is somebody who lives in Leicestershire and has actually had 2 encounters in her life, and we're going to concentrate on the main one, which was in 2017. Emma, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for coming along. Please tell us all about what happened in May 2017 when you were out walking with was it with your mother-in-law?
It was mother-in-law and, my dog Duke. We decided to go a normal walk like we do. Literally, the houses behind us is just the National Forest. So you just walk out our door, you go through one farmer's field, through the one-way marker, and then that's it. It's woods everywhere. Literally, we went up there and then we turned left, which is our normal route, because she's from Romania, so she's got very little English. But when we turned, I was actually walking and looking at the ground at the time. And then she pulled my arm back and then pointed and she said, "Animal." And I said, "Oh, it's just a dog. It's okay. Don't worry. It's not going to hurt you." Because they have a lot of dogs in Romania, which they're wild. And I don't think she was quite sure. So I just said to her, it's fine. Carry on walking. Well, we thought was a dog. It's just lying down back to us. You could see it's quite skinny, but it's longer than a Labrador. Its hips were like sticking out. It was just sitting there and I was like, okay, that's weird. We started walking a bit closer to it and it had some kind of fluffy animal in its mouth. I don't know whether it was a rabbit. I don't know whether it was a hare because it was quite a big rabbit. Or was it a fox? She stopped, I stopped. This thing was ripping this thing apart and we just took a step back and she said, no. She pulled me back. I says, okay, let's go. We turned round. It didn't have pointy ears. It was like rounded. I knew then it wasn't a dog. I was like, what is that? She said, I don't know. No. Pulled me back, pulled my shoulder back. And then we walked very fast back out to tell the tale. But obviously no one believed us. And it's very difficult when people don't believe you because you give so much detail out. I saw spots, what people said that you can see. Those panthers I see in the zoo look a bit big. This is a bit smaller. Bit bigger than a Labrador.
Okay. Did you see the tail well?
The tail was curled. It was like, because the grass was quite long where it was lying, it was curled around its own body.
And can you describe the tail as much as you can, much as you saw it?
Very long. The tail looked longer than the body. The body was very sleek. The skin looked very smooth, not fluffy or anything like that.
And the colour was what?
It looked black because it was surrounded by woods, so it looked quite dark anyway, and it was getting late-ish. It was lying down in the long grass, munching, ripping something apart. Like I said, I don't know what type of animal it was eating. We didn't want to stop any longer, especially with my mother-in-law. She was very scared.
Was it aware of you?
No, it wasn't. That's the thing. It didn't turn round at all. It was carrying on eating its meal. We just started going back slowly. I was looking at its ears because its ears were moving a bit in different directions at the side. So it's like, I'm not sure if it did hear us, but it wasn't interested. It was more interested in whatever it caught.
How close were you when you retreated?
Quite a few meters away. We were walking on the path, which is very flat, but this thing was lying in the long grass onto the right-hand side. It was ripping the skin off this animal, so it was biting it and then ripping up, but still lying down, ripping it, and then it was go back in again.
Tell us about going back there.
It took me a while to go back there. I was pretty scared. Even when I told my husband, I says, I don't dare to go back there for a long while. It took me nearly 6 months to go back up there. But I only went back up there with somebody else. I would never go by myself.
Yeah.
I rang the police when I saw it, and they told me they have lots of sightings all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Just don't go after dusk and don't walk in the morning. That is their response.
Yeah, and of course you were at dusk, weren't you? And that is a good time there, right?
Yes, it was getting dusk, so the sun was just about to go down, just before it was going down, It wasn't dark, just enough light to see through the woods.
I remember you saying that, because I asked you to photograph where it had been, and you said, well, I'm going to wait till I've got some friends to go with. But
I know, that's it.
Which is fine, I do accept that.
I think I did took some pictures.
Yeah, that what I remember about them was that you could see the depression in the grass, a sort of elongated, long depression, which would seem about right.
Narrow.
Yeah. Incidentally, did you hear any sounds when you were watching it?
No, I didn't. That's the thing. And it was like, when you're going into a wood and you hear nothing, no birds, nothing. That's how it was. And I was just looking down at the ground at the time, just walking Duke. And the dog, he actually was trying to pull me forward, but I pulled him back. His ears pricked up. He's a Labrador cross collie, so his ears always look pricked up anyway. But he was like in a stare, and he was pulling on his lead. And I thought, oh, dog, pull him back, as I do on the lead. But then this thing wasn't moving, and I didn't see anyone around. So I thought, can't be a dog. Where's the owner? Lying there. The colour of the animal it was ripping up was like a grey, orangey colour. See, someone said it might have been a hare. We do quite get a lot of hares around here.
Okay.
Quite big rabbits.
Yeah, a hare would be a good sized snack, something like a black leopard. Do you think your dog realised what was before it?
I think my dog thought it was another dog because he's a very boisterous dog anyway. So when he sees another dog, he will pull towards someone's dog.
Okay.
Just to play, and he started pulling, and then I'm pulling him the other way, going, no, that's not right. It looked young. I'll say rangy. You couldn't see its ribs, but like on a normal domestic cat where their hips stick out anyway, it was a little bit like that.
How did you find the experience of being in the media? Do you regret that, or did you find it a hassle, or did you just feel it was a sort of public duty?
You get a lot of skeptics because now it just goes over my head. But at the time, you get a load of people, a skeptic. But I thought, you know what? I know what I've seen. And if they think like that, wait till they come across something like that and then let them tell the tale and they'll be in the same situation as me. That's the way I see it.
What about friends and neighbours? How did they react?
I don't think they believed me. I really didn't.
But presumably you wanted to alert them to the fact that there was a bit of a risk round the corner in the local fields.
Well, yeah, because dog walkers go up there, and then I put it on the local spotted media sites, and then obviously you get all the trolls online laughing and joking about it. And then I think it was like 2 weeks later, just after my sighting, another one came in, but it wasn't far.
Yeah. Do you find it reassuring that there's been others nearby?
Yes, it does. It makes me feel like I'm not alone. But this thing is not all the time. This is why the skeptics are out there.
Yeah.
They'll say, oh, well, if it was real, you'll see it all the time. Well, I want to know, even myself, where does it go? Where does it hide? But we do have a lot of disused railway lines around here. We have underground tunnels that you can walk through under the main roads. This thing can go woods to woods, private land where people can't go.
A lot of people don't sort of mention it, of course, anyway. So the majority of the reports will not be in the press anyway. In 1999, you were a lot younger then when you had this other.
Yeah, I was 12 years old. I wasn't alone. I was with my two sisters. We went for a late bike ride.
This is in a different part of Leicestershire, near Loughborough.
Yes, this is Loughborough. AstraZeneca is in Loughborough, and it's just on the outskirts. You've got the canal that goes round, and then you've got all the countryside again. But it's on the outskirts of Loughborough, basically.
And so what happened?
We was actually on the road dodging frogs. It was Helen, my sister. She goes, Emma, what's that? I said, what's what? She says she saw it fully. All I saw was its long tail. The tail was so long. I would say about 4 foot long, very thick. Again, it was at night time, black. This thing was just sitting under a street light in the industrial estate. And it just quickly went when we went towards. We just threw our bikes onto the path, drove to run up to the embankment where it was sitting, and we got the torches out and we shone the torch in the field. We were waiting for something to be seen, because this thing shot like lightning. It was gone. Then it turned. All we saw was two eyes looking at us. I said, Helen goes, it's there. And then we shone the torch, and then it just went into the darkness, which goes straight to the lake. So that's my first encounter. I didn't believe it at the time.
The description that your sister gave, how did she describe it?
She said it had rounded ears, and she said it was long and big. I just saw its tail go over very quickly. It was scared of us.
And what about the eye shine? How was that?
The eye shine, if I remember, it was more like a greeny, yellowy, and it was like changing different colours. But in the distance, the eyes were quite far apart.
Pretty bright, were they?
Very bright, yeah. We didn't have Facebook, stuff like
sure.
that. We didn't even have the flash camera with us or anything.
No.
No one believed us. Mum and Dad especially left it off. No one believes us. Until it happens to them, then they'll believe that's the way it come across.
How do you feel personally about big cats being around in Britain?
I just think let them be, because when I've done some research on it, apparently people used to have them as pets in the 1970s, and because of the license that came out, a lot of people just let them roam. It makes you think, well, surely when I had that sighting in 1999, it would have been dead off by now, but it seems to be up and down the country, so there must be more than one. But as long as there's no risk to the public, they seem quite shy animals, and they just want to be out the way and carry on with their lives, just as a fox would, or badger, or whatever.
Yeah. Are you careful with your young children? Do you take them out for walks in the local countryside?
I do, but I have to be with people now. Since my sighting, and I know some things there, it has been a bigger group. I can't just be on my own with the kids now.
Yeah. So how do you feel then? You just feel more on edge, and you need the company of other people in case anything happens?
Yeah. It's like when I walk the dog, sometimes I'll hear like twigs snapping, and then it's automatic, oh, something there. But then I see it's a blackbird.
Yes.
And then carrying a twig out of the ground. I'm more paranoid of my environment, but I'm having other people saying, love nature, just get out there, enjoy it, don't worry about it. It's very easy for them to say that, but when you've seen something that you wouldn't expect out there, you sort of step back from what other people are saying.
Do you go out less, do you think, overall because of that?
I have actually been out less, and I've been more on my computer. More than been out, which is quite sad, but because I love the outdoor nature. But I'm just always worried that there's something going to be there that's going to pounce on me.
Yeah, but of course your dog would alert you, presumably, if there was something there.
Yeah, he's a bit of a soft one, though. That's the thing. He's not a vicious dog.
No.
I don't think he'll protect me. I think he'll be more wagging his tail.
Yeah, being submissive and hiding behind you. Yeah. I mean, I had a lady and her husband report driving at 1 a.m. at night in Gloucestershire, and they had to brake in the road because a deer ran across the path of the car. And as they came to a halt, a panther was pursuing the deer, stopped and turned round, looked at the car through the windscreen and hissed, and then carried on pursuing the deer. And that lady...
Oh, God.
Yeah, and she said, thinking about it, the deer did appear when they first saw it to be running for its life. So that lady contacted me because she, a bit like you, was very, very wary about and on edge about going for walks in the countryside. That is a shame it has influenced you so much, but I think people could understand. But you still enjoy the countryside, enjoy nature with other people's
I
company.
do,
Yeah,
yes.
which is that's good.
I'm
Yeah.
trying to attract more wildlife into my own garden so that I can still enjoy the birds and things like that.
Okay.
So,
And of course, the kids will benefit from that, won't they?
yes, going on a wildlife trust.
Oh, lovely. Yeah.
So we get a lot of things to make in the garden.
Mm.
We made beehive, bug hive.
Bug hotel things. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. They pin it on the fence.
Excellent. Yeah.
So yeah, trying to attract wildlife in.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I hope it does change through time.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's good that you still embrace nature as much as you can in ways that you can. I think that's so important. Well, Emma, that has been very valuable to hear about your close encounter, and I'm sure people can understand how you feel and the wariness you now have about being in the outdoors. But thanks ever so much for taking us through those encounters.
Thank you very much.
Okay, that wraps up this episode of Big Cat Conversations. Thank you for listening, everyone. Next episode, we will be hearing from the producer of a forthcoming documentary called Britain's Big Cat Mystery. We're going to be hearing all about the production of that documentary and the issues which arose during its creation. We're also going to hear from Paul, who's based in Bristol. He had an intriguing encounter in Dorset a few years ago. He's now active in and around Bristol, Avon, North Somerset and South Gloucestershire. So we'll hear from Matt and Paul in the southwest in episode 8. Thanks for listening and take care.